Hey, welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm really, really pleased to be with you. I am actually just getting home from a medical appointment for my recent concussion, and I'm going to pour some tea. Just a moment. I'm so glad to be here on time with you and to have had the chance to go to the therapy as well. So, yeah. In fact, I'll talk about it as part of our process today, this experience of tending to ourselves, really taking care of ourselves, particularly when there's a need. Like I was in a car accident in April, so I do have a significant concussion, and we can't forego the kind of care that we need for these medical events. Just one moment as I stir this tea. Yeah, so thank you for being here. Okay, what I'd like to do is start with a short practice together so we can settle in. These are really, really important conversations, the community conversations that we have. And one thing I really want to do is also introduce you to the origins of the dilemmas that we have with things like self-care and self-neglect and self-abandonment and all those things. So let's take a few moments to sit together and just have a meditative time. Again, thank you for being here. For those of you who are able to make it here in the live Zoom, and then those of you who come in to watch the recording, that'll be great too. Yeah. So we'll do a short practice together, and this is a way of centering yourself for putting aside everything else that's not relevant to right now and giving you the primary focus on your own radar screen. Okay, so go ahead and close your eyes for a few moments. And start orienting to the present moment, which is inherently free of everything else. Like the present moment, just as it is. I know we're arriving with our particular cluttered minds or busy mental habits, whatever it is. But the present moment as its own thing is like walking into a sanctuary that is free from the distractions, the duties, the mayhem. So invite yourself to breathe that in here in the present moment. You are completely free to be here as yourself, however you're showing up, and know that inherently there is a deep simplicity to the present moment. Lengthen up through your spine, relax your shoulders down away from your ears. Allow the breath to drop down into the low abdomen. Lift the center of your heart. So that's up through the spine, down through the shoulders, down with the breath, and then a little lift in the heart. And begin to notice what it's like for you to prioritize the time to be here or to listen, to participate, whether it's in the live Zoom or in the YouTube video afterwards. Notice what it's like that you have prioritized yourself to be here. And then take in one more deep breath with that acknowledgement you have prioritized yourself to be here. And then you can raise your hands to your heart in Anjali Mudra. Notice that when the palms come together like that, there's a little space between the centers of the palms, a place where the palms don't touch. So in that space, you can put like your personal intention for being here. And then please bow your head to your heart if you like that gesture. Then you may release your hands and please open your eyes. Okay, so we are here to talk this afternoon about getting free from self-neglect, which is something I want to kind of unpack for you. What is self-neglect? What What's the origin of it? What does it feel like? What does it look like in our lives? Because sometimes we have acclimated so much to it that we don't realize that it's called self-neglect, right? So that's one of the things that happens, is that we acclimate beyond recognizing that we've acclimated to something that's actually kind of unhealthy for us. So let me just change the view on my screen. There we go. Okay. So what it might feel like or look like with self-neglect is things like you don't have the time to hydrate. You don't have the time to clip your own fingernails. You don't have the time for doing your laundry. You don't have the time for things in the normal course of the day. Those things are pushed into the after hours or the margins of your schedule or your calendar, or you're trying to multitask and do those things as you're doing something else because you could never get to them, and now it's reached a point where you have to do it, or else no clean clothes, for example. And so there's a kind of rhythm in life that can take over when we have self-neglect. It's the feeling that everything else comes before we do. Everything else becomes prioritized before we prioritize something for ourselves, even if it's really simple. And so you might be somebody, for example, who does certain things compulsively, like you always go to the gym, and yet there are other places where you neglect yourself, like you don't stand up for yourself in a family conversation. Or it could be the most obvious form of self-neglect is things like we don't eat the foods that are nourishing for us. We eat what somebody else is eating, because keeping that association or that social ease is easier than saying, no, I don't want to eat that. I'm going to eat my own thing. Or the self-neglect of I stay up past my own bedtime because I want to share an activity with you and you're not willing to go to bed at a reasonable time, so I choose your bedtime instead of my bedtime. Or you're having ice cream, so I have ice cream, because if I don't have it, you say to me, what's the matter? Why aren't you having the ice cream? Or somebody brings cookies into the room, people are partaking of the cookies, and so I have a cookie because it's less comfortable to have the cookie than it is to say, like, no, thank you, or to stand out a little bit in that regard. So it can also appear to be things like there are some things you would prefer to do. You have certain values or priorities, but they never kind of come to the top of the list. They're always getting pushed down by other things. And there's a feeling that once I do A, then I get to take care of B. Oh, but then C comes, and then you're going to do D. Oh, but then E comes, and then you're kind of on F. And then at a certain point, you're like just foregoing the whole thing. So let's talk about that matrix. It might have some symptoms, for example, and these may not seem connected to you. So listen up to see if you have any of these symptoms, because one of the root causes of these symptoms is consistent or pervasive self-neglect. So insomnia, digestive problems, physical pain or inflammation in the body, headaches, anxiety, depression, the feeling that there's never enough time in the day, you'll never get it all done, and the anxiety that you're about to fail. Also, this felt sense in the body of being, like, we call it waterlogged or having edema. The body feels heavier or more lethargic or more apathetic. Or you're in the diet mill, so you're in the sort of diet hamster wheel thing, trying to stay away from certain foods and commit to other activities. And it's occupying a certain part of your brain so much that other things fall off your radar screen. So there's physical sensations like insomnia, headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain in the body, inflammation in the body, feeling heavy or waterlogged in the body. And then there's also the mental patterns. Never enough time. I can't get it all done. Something's always coming my way. I tend to that before I tend to myself, and so on. So with that whole spectrum, there are root causes. So for example, when you were born, and then we talk about this in yoga psychology, we go to the first chakra. When you were born into a care-providing environment. And that environment was there to help you to experience yourself physically, physiologically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, spiritually, in every way. Of course, many families are not prepared for that because the parents themselves didn't get that kind of mentoring. But let's say there you are at the first chakra and you're born into a felt sense that there's preoccupied people in your care providing environment. So their preoccupation would register to you as, where are you on the priority? And their preoccupation could be like really significant things like basic survival issues. Maybe there's a sense of poverty or instability in the job market for the parents, or there's other kiddos in the family who have higher needs or special needs, or somebody in the family system has an illness that has to be tended to. And so for legitimate reasons, your care providing environment can seem preoccupied. And then you'll tend to become more self-reliant. There's an attachment style that goes with that too, if you've studied attachment theory. And that attachment style is called avoidant dismissive attachment style. You basically learn that other people might not be able to be counted on for certain needs. And so you learned to be self-reliant. You may have learned, not by any cognition, you might have learned that their rhythm and your rhythm were not the same. And so you adopted a rhythm that can feel like yours. And it might be out of step with theirs to some extent, but it's a rhythm that you can trust because you're creating it in yourself. So we can kind of create our own internal sphere of how things go for us. And that means that we've oriented away from the anticipation that other people could meet our needs. We orientate away from anticipating that other people can connect with us or meet our needs or really deeply satiate what we're asking for. So we become more self-reliant. That's a very important aspect of what one of the root causes of self-neglect. The more self-reliant we are, you might think, oh, the better I'll be at taking care of myself. Except that what you're still beholden to is an environment of connection to some extent. And so you small down that other people can't really meet your needs. Therefore, you're going to have to do it, but it's going to come at the end of the day or in the margins or after everything else is taken care of. Like your needs don't really matter that much because you've already reduced the circuitry for need because it's too painful to keep the needs open when others can't meet them. This is from your earliest life. It's too painful to keep that need circuitry open if the needs are not getting met. So you small them down, you become more self-reliant, and then instead of that being like, okay, I'm self-reliant and I'll take care of my needs as they come to me, what occurs is your needs get pushed into the margins and they're small down, like I was saying. Because you still do feel some inclination to avoid conflict, but maintain contact. Avoid conflict, don't stir conflict, but maintain enough contact. And so you will still do tasks and responsibilities that are yours to do as you come into adulthood, of course, not when you're an infant. And then you'll still come last. You've smalled your own needs down. A second root cause, rather than neglect in your environment, a second root cause is that it's chaotic in your environment. There's no sense of rhythm. In fact, people's needs don't get identified. Even the care providers don't have a good sense of their own needs. So you don't sense that they have a self in there that's going to have a certain care routine, right? Like in my case with my family system, I did not sense that my mother had a sense of self in there that was like, it was vacant. There wasn't anybody in there. But our household had a lot of chaos around things because there was no organizing principle there. So what can happen in this case is that the chaos makes you have an antenna, several antennas, towards hypervigilance. And your antenna are like, what is needed of me in order to somehow maintain this chaos from tipping over an edge, right? Like somehow I'm going to, as a young person, an infant, a toddler, I'm going to somehow sense this chaotic environment and I'm going to sense when it needs me to respond in a certain way in order for me to get my needs met. So I'm going to sense like, when are the openings? If I keep my antenna up, I'm going to know when there's an opening and I might get one of my needs met. But I'm more likely filtering more often for the chaos and the sense that in that chaos, the personhood of the care providers might actually be missing. Right? So they're tending to things. They're tending to maybe even you feel like an object sometimes. So they're tending to your basic needs. You have the things that you're supposed to have, but you don't feel like there's a personal connection going on there. In that case, your self-neglect has a root cause in that chaos, such that you might create a life that has a little bit of scatteredness like all the time. Maybe you're always catching up with yourself. You're always the one who's running late. Your to-do list always has the things crossed off, but ones are added to the bottom. Or your to-do list is not a list, it's a piece of paper and it's written in all these different ways. And you are not on that to-do list. But sometimes you might write things like, get the nails done, but you don't get to go do it because something else comes up, or you might write haircut or something like that, or you might put on your to-do list, go to the gym, but you end up postponing that to another day or to later in the day, and then the place is closed and so on. A third root cause of self-neglect. So the first one is that the environment doesn't really tune into you, and there's a kind of neglect. The parents are preoccupied, the care providers are not really so aware of you, so they're not tuning into you. So you don't develop a sense of self that you can register, that people would be interested in that sense of self, and that your needs would matter to them. The second you're in that chaotic environment, you don't sense that they have a sense of self, but you're supposed to fill in somewhere to make that chaos work. Something about you is going to make that work somehow. Probably it's when you're in a good mood or you're doing a certain thing that pleases those sort of people. Okay, a third cause of self-neglect is that as you're developing, you have the appropriate physiological needs. You have the appropriate hunger and fatigue and desire for connection. You have the appropriate signals going out from your organism. And what's happening when those signals are going out is that it's getting met with intermittent things like confusion, agitation, irritation. You can't be hungry now. It's not time for dinner. Or we just ate. You can't be hungry again. Or the kind of like, what do you mean you feel that way? Kind of like critical or somewhat scolding, or you sense that your parents are overwhelmed by your physiological needs, that like they're anxious to get it right, or they're overwhelmed and feel burdened by. So you're broadcasting these very appropriate, very valid physiological needs, and it's getting met in a sea of configuration between the care providing people in that environment. It's getting met with confusing intermittent responses, and then sometimes it's getting right on, like they get it, and that feels so good. And in that moment when they get it, you're like, oh, like all is well. Your brain registers it's going to be okay. Now this chaotic particular, sometimes invalidating, sometimes dismissive, sometimes critical, sometimes condescending, and sometimes right on, is a very confusing way for your brain to figure out how to meet your own needs, or how to have your needs participate in relationships, or how to sense the needs of others as theirs and your needs as yours. So in each of these cases, you end up with a certain attachment style. In the preoccupied parents, the sense of self has to be more self-reliant. That's called an avoidant dismissive attachment style. When the parents, there's a lot of chaos, and sometimes that chaos is overwhelming the household, and you have to figure out how to participate to kind of somehow stabilize that household. You end up likely with a more anxious ambivalent attachment style. You sense that you're dependent upon the other to actually kind of see you or get you. And then when you have this, not just chaotic, but intermittently getting it, or really being off and scolding and even shaming, that kind of thing can lead to a disorganized attachment style. So that's all pretty confusing for your brain, and it's developing a map. Your brain is developing a map of you in the world and of your needs in the matrix of your social milieu. And so what's really cool about that is that that map can be updated. It can be reorganized. One of the really important things is that this began with your physiological needs. Like as you were talking, as you were walking, as you were sorting things out, as you were eating, as you were learning how to feed yourself, all of that, those physiological needs and that rhythm got co-created in an environment that you were the most vulnerable person in. I mean, you're more vulnerable than the adults. Not that you're the most vulnerable sibling, but you know, when you're at a certain age, you are vulnerable to, here's the environment, and you kind of get shaped by the environment. Those physiological needs, you can start tending to that now, even in your adult life. You get to create the new rhythm. And in creating that, you're healing the physiology of your earliest years, and you're updating it to the physiology you want today, that you want to have for increased self-care and decreased self-neglect, for example. So on that note, let's look at a couple of examples. I said them at the beginning, but it's worth reiterating them. Okay, so you feel that somebody else is having dessert, so you have dessert with them. And you do that because they're going to say, if you're not having the dessert, they're going to say, hey, why aren't you having dessert? What's the matter with you? Or how come you're not going to participate? Like somebody in your adult world is able to touch the vulnerable places in you from your earliest life. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I should just have the dessert, even though I'm not hungry and I actually don't want it, but not participating makes me stand out. And it somehow feels uncomfortable to me to do that. And that is a hint right there. Somehow it feels uncomfortable to me. Oh, you're having a body memory of your developmental years. And that is such a cool thing. You're having this body memory. You could tune into that body memory and go, oh, it's really awkward to stand out, for example. This is not for everyone, but for some of you, it's going to be really awkward to be like, I'm doing a different thing. Or it's painful to feel like you're being scolded for not doing what everyone else is doing. Oh, wow, that's interesting. That's a body memory, right? Or another example that I had in Hunger, Hope, and Healing is that our group members, our participants will be like, well, I stay up late because that's what my spouse is doing. And we're kind of like watching this senseless TV. It's not really good for me. I don't sleep that well. We end up eating snacks at that time of night. And, generally speaking, it's not that wonderful for me. I don't really super enjoy, but it's the only time that we have together. So the marriage in that case has configured itself to that rhythm. And it can reconfigure itself. But the women in Hunger, Hope, and Healing, often they have to be the catalyst for that to get reconfigured. So they have to say to the spouse or the partner or the life mate, whatever you call this person in your world, hey, I'm going to go to bed. I'm in Hunger, Hope, and Healing now, and it's really helpful if I go to sleep by a certain time of night because it's better for my circadian rhythm. It's better for my melatonin. It's better for my digestion. I'm going to have a better mood if I have better sleep. All these really important reasons, both based on Ayurveda and Western sleep hygiene, really key reasons to go to sleep at an appropriate time and not with the TV on as the last activity of the day. And as you come to approaching that conversation, the discomfort that might come there, or the strategy, like if you feel like, well, I just have to do it, you get kind of like bold or black and white about it. I'm just going to do it. Whatever has been happening, there's a body memory there. And whatever you feel like you have to do to make this thing happen is going to also have a body memory in it. So when you come to it with wisdom and support, like in Hunger, Hope, and Healing, you get to say it in a way that you're actually recalibrating the relationship. You're reconfiguring how you and others have configured these relationships unknowingly. Those are forms of self-neglect because what a person is choosing to do is to lean into the preference of the other, like sort of putting aside what's important to you. Now, some other examples are, we call this one foregoing, which is where you have this longing, you have this desire, you've got something on your schedule or in your mind, or you have, let's say you're on vacation and the one thing that you really wanted to do was, I don't know, go to the Ferris wheel. And yet, as the vacation is going on, everything else is getting tossed in there and you're like, I guess it wasn't that important to me to go to the Ferris wheel, so we don't have to do that one. I'll let it go. You're foregoing something that was important to you on behalf of the group or the family situation. But that habit of foregoing is not limited to vacation. That was just an example. The other ways it shows up, you know what? You're going to wake up in the morning, get to your yoga mat, except that you forego it when you get the first text message. Or wake up feeling a little bit tired, a little bit groggy. You really wanted to go for a walk outside, but oh, somebody needs me. So you forego your own intentions. Or you're about to do something and then it's like, it's just a little bit too hard enough, and you end up not doing it. For example, you were going to have, I don't know, green tea instead of coffee. And the coffee maker is right there and it's automatic and it just comes out, and the green tea, you've got to wait for it to steep itself or, whatever it is. It feels like too long. So, oh, forget it. I'll do what's quick and easy. Those are all habits of foregoing yourself. And foregoing is one of the forms of self-neglect. You forego your own needs and desires. It would be as if you got your car stuck in the mud and the wheels are turning with every effort you make to get out of the mud. And at a certain point, you stop trying. You put the accelerator down. Oh, it's a good idea. It's going to go this. Oh, it didn't happen. Oh, okay. At a certain point, it's going to be like, it's not that important. I'll just leave the car here. I'll start walking. So foregoing is something that you learned very early on. It shows up as an adult, but you learned it very early on. So let's think of the the self-reliant child who had preoccupied parents. You forego certain things that you would have wanted quite naturally from the parent. You forego it because you sense that it's not available. And you sense it. You don't know it in your cognition, you sense it. And so you learn to forego the idea that other people will be able to tune into you. Let's say the chaotic environment where you have to always like make sure that things are going to be somehow okay. That's become your duty. Maybe you're even really good at it. You're highly competent and so on and so forth. And you have an idea of something you want to do, but the chaos takes over again and you learn to forego what it was that you wanted to do. That's an early form of foregoing. Or for example, you forego something for yourself because it's going to abate conflict in a system. So you forego. It's all right. I don't care. Whatever you guys want to do, I don't really have an opinion on that. Whichever movie you want to go to is fine. That's all right. That sort of foregoing that's conflict avoidant, you learn that at a really, really early age. You might be able to tell me explicitly that you also experienced it in middle school and high school and so on, but we learned it much younger than that. And let's say the other form I gave earlier where you are sometimes totally met, but also intermittently it's very chaotic, it's misattuned, it's shaming, it's critical and so on. And so you don't really know where you're supposed to be. It's like getting a broken mirror to look into, like, well, who am I? What are my needs? I don't know. And foregoing in that case can be like, it's kind of too hard to know what we need or want. So it's sort of like a ho-hum. I forego it again. I don't know. Not really sure what I want. And that each of those patterns of foregoing can lead to then a chronic experience of postponing yourself or procrastinating. Postponing yourself is a very common way of saying to yourself that in the present moment you can do A, B, or C because you're making a kind of hidden agreement with yourself that you'll tend to something about yourself later, but later never comes. It doesn't show up. Or it comes like after dark, and because it comes after dark, sometimes it's going to have food associated with it. Like, oh, I get to have some alone time finally. I'm going to have the food that makes my alone time feel more comforting or numb, like comfortably numb, like Pink Floyd used to say. But this pattern of foregoing that becomes the pattern of postponing is you learn how to postpone certain things. You might have great stamina or duration for postponing, but it's not recommended because then you start looking around at the things that you have postponed that become your procrastinations. And you're able to procrastinate yourself, but you probably don't procrastinate other people's needs very often. In fact, if you think about if you had a really good friend who was always postponing you, who was always procrastinating your get-together with them, would they still be a good friend? Would that be the way you'd want to have a good friendship? Probably not. But in terms of relating with ourselves, we have gotten comfortable. There's some hidden agreement in here that we say it's okay for me to postpone myself or procrastinate myself or put myself last because somehow that is less painful than the pain of causing conflict out here. It's less painful than the pain of realizing you can't meet my needs and I don't know what to do about it. Or the pain of I have to meet your needs because if I don't, you won't even recognize me. This is early life I'm saying again. So this foregoing and postponing is less painful than the other pain. So initially we were trying to solve pain. We didn't realize we were going to be creating a lifelong pattern that we needed food to numb us about. So food comes in as a soothing or like a balm or kind of numbing or sedating us. It comes in to help us with the pain that we're actually building up inside, the pain that we don't know that is actually there. So it's an interesting way to think about it because it seems like food is the problem, but it's actually not. Food is trying to be part of the solution. Now it becomes problematic because then we're using food to try to meet the needs that aren't getting met, and we're using food to try to dull the pain of the needs not getting met. So it's like a full cycle in that regard. What's happening is there's this slow trajectory that becomes your new acclimation point. you're kind of going down on the mountain of your vitality, you're going down on the mountain of your moods, and there's going to be events in life or arcs in life or things with your hormones or so on that end up causing you to feel like really uncomfortable and ill-equipped to manage certain things. You might wake up one morning and realize like you're burned out, or you have adrenal fatigue, or you've got some autoimmune conditions. Or that's an interesting thing, by the way. The autoimmune condition is very interesting when it comes to the body-mind experience. If you think about it, your body is saying no. Where are there places in your life that you haven't said the no that you're supposed to be saying, and your body is saying no to you? But that no is also, sometimes it's causing you to have to say no to others, because the autoimmune condition means that you have to say no. You can't go to A, B, or C, or you can't do what you once had done. So let's not have that trajectory go down, down, down like that, where you have your body saying no to you. But that acclimation is happening already. So I want to give you a little lift on the mountain, a little rise that can come up from there. And that is starting with your physiological needs to tend to yourself, to sneak that in, to prioritize yourself all throughout the day. Little prioritizations. Doesn't have to be like upending your life. But to get free from self-neglect, we have to make the inroads. We have to take the steps, both large and small, that are going to give us the new neurological pathways to not keep repeating the old neurological pathways. That's one of the things, that the old pathways are very well grooved. And so as familiar as they have become, we have to deprioritize that as the way that we are in the world, right? That we have acclimated to it. And you know what? Our care people, our friends and family members, our employers, employees, they've all acclimated to it too. They're expecting us to act in a certain way because we created that. So did they, by the way. It's not like you're the only one struggling with this. This is definitely a widespread pattern, right? So in that acclimation, the process of deacclimating, if you do it slowly, slowly at first, it's going to feel safer to you to do it with your own physiological needs before it's going to feel safe to say to person A, B, and C, I'm doing things differently now, and this is what it's going to look like. Because if we sort of pull out the sword, as we say in Buddhism, if I'm going to pull out the sword, which is really meant to be the sword of discernment, but I'm like, okay, this is the new regime. It might be the other side of the self-neglect pendulum. Like over here, I'm neglecting myself. Over here, I'm pulling it all together, and it's going to look like this. Everybody line up. That's probably not going to be that helpful. That's more of a left brain strategy. I'm going to pull this all together. And if you look back at the other community conversations, like about diet culture, I think you can see in there what happens when you swing a pendulum. So we begin kind of in the middle of the pendulum, where we're saying, okay, let me take care of these basic physiological needs intermittently all day long, and then see how I'm feeling at the end of the day. Let me not forego myself for even the small things, right? If you had, for example, I just had a yoga therapy session that I was teaching, and I was co-teaching with a friend of mine who has type 1 diabetes, which she was diagnosed with in her adult life. And she really explained the whole process of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. And she said she has to do about 85 to 100 times a day. She has to check what she's doing with her body and her blood sugar. This is a lot of little decisions to make all day long. She basically said you have to act like you are the pancreas because it's not doing its own job. And so that many times a day, she has this opportunity to be like, I matter. Something about me matters. So for us, it could be something like you take a 3-minute mindfulness timeout. You put an alarm on your phone, little timeout for mindfulness. Remember yourself, remember your body, remember your breath. Come right inside. You could do a walk around the block. It's okay to get up from your desk and walk around the block once. You could go outside to water a plant, or to, like in my case, I could clip some honeysuckle. It's growing like crazy out there. I could clip a couple hostas. I don't have to get every hosta in the garden that needs to be trimmed right now. You can space these things out so you have this intermittent connectedness, a dependable, reliable, rhythmic connection, rather than the intermittent chaos or attunement that I said in the third style of relating. And rather than the chaos or the neglect that comes from preoccupation with your care providers, you create a rhythm that has consistent and reliable, dependable, and intermittent, means throughout the day, not just once in the morning, because once in the morning is not actually enough. If you're going to rewire this, we want to do it throughout the day like this, and then see what it feels like at the end of the day to have not forgotten yourself. You didn't forego yourself. Now, it's possible that you're going to start doing this, and thanks for your question. I can see that there. Yeah, I'm answering other questions that came to me by email also. So I'll say this one in response to what you're saying right there. It's possible that as you do this, you're going to start realizing that it's been pretty painful to be disconnected. Yes, you're right on there in the chat. Yeah, it's been pretty painful to be disconnected. So as you start doing these things and you're prioritizing yourself, you're going to have like a dual monitor experience. One is you're coming to life because you're mattering to yourself. And the other is you're realizing how painful it's been to be away from yourself or to be disconnected from yourself. So it's really helpful to have support for that kind of realization, because it's kind of hard to know what to do with it, because that pain of disconnection from yourself is ancient. It goes way back to when you weren't able to secure a connection inside. You didn't have the support or the role modeling to really get that established. And so you're touching a painful experience of disconnection that goes back to earliest life and has been there throughout different periods of your life in different ways all along. It will end up being like under the radar screen, but it's always giving little pings on the radar screen. So yeah, exactly. This is both a proactive, nourishing, rewiring process, and it's going to be healing retroactively. So it's proactive and it's retroactive in both directions. Yeah, great question. There is one more question here. Let me see what it says. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in a previous community conversation, I did talk about this. There's, it's so funny how this does come up quite a bit. When you start hydrating, yes, you're going to have to go pee more often, right? And if you experience, that is such a good question that you're asking. I don't know if you've been in the other community conversations, but I do appreciate your asking this question the way that you did. So if you start hydrating yourself and then you're like, hey, I have to go pee more often, you know what? That's kind of inconvenient. The feeling of physiological need being inconvenient is another body memory. It's a body memory from your earliest life. If your physiological needs are inconvenient, it's probably a memory of that being inconvenient somewhere else. When you were growing up, you learned that something about you was inconvenient. And don't take that too, let's say linearly. Don't take it too explicitly. This is an implicit felt sense when we can say as an adult now, like, oh, going pee that often is going to be inconvenient. But we had a felt sense somewhere in our earliest life, like something about me is inconvenient to others. There is a correlation there. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, the work that we're talking about here. So I'm speaking with lots of experience in this case. Now, what you could do when you have the inconvenience of having to go to the bathroom to go pee, you could say, oh, I'm going to get to have a timeout. I'm going to go take a few minutes in the bathroom. I'm going to feel like my body is doing the body thing that it's meant to be doing. It's going to do that thing right now. My body's taking care of me. I'm cleansing right now. I'm peeing. The body, all the cleansing that happens with the hydration, the lymph system, the circulation system, the skin, the muscles, the tissues. Oh, how nice. I'm getting some cleansing. Rather than like, I got to get back to my desk. Can I pee faster? Right? That kind of thing. I know you said, I just saw that in the chat too. Can you pee faster? Right? Yes, I know. It's crazy also what's become of our world and the pace of our world, the way that we're expected to respond, the way that everything is happening at such a quick pace. And I can say this, especially having a concussion, the anticipated pace of responsiveness for things is extraordinary. I mean, I probably had better responsiveness before my concussion. I'm quite sure I did. And now I can feel like, oh, it's really expected of me. And sometimes my response time is going to be slower. because of this event, the car accident I had in April. So yeah, so those are some things about neglect and self-neglect that I wanted to talk through. And, you know, I said this a couple of times and I say it on a regular basis, like the thing that you have created, your whole like matrix and the internal system that you've had, it was a response to pain, trying to solve pain, reduce conflict or reduce the longevity of pain. And you didn't know that you were going to end up in pain. You didn't know it. You didn't know. And you know what? You don't have to sort all that out on your own. You don't have to sort this through from here going forward on your own. If what I've said is like stimulating questions for you, or it's kind of compelling but a little bit confusing, or it kind of touches you somewhere but you're not quite sure where to put it, by all means, be in touch with me. Put a comment in the comments below, or use my email address, go to the website, use the contact form, whatever you need to. Be in touch with me because you don't have to sort this out on your own. You generated it without realizing you were generating the pattern. You don't have to solve that pattern on your own. Support is available. I would be happy to help you. And we have a community of support that's available in Hunger, Hope, and Healing too. So let me leave it there for you all this afternoon. And again, thank you for your questions. I just love the way you phrase some of those things in the chat. I've been teaching this for 25 years. I've been in my own recovery for that long, actually longer than that, because I didn't begin teaching right away. And even, you know, hearing somebody sort of grok something like that, like right here in real time, it's still very exciting for me. It's energizing to help you with it. So yes, thank you. Thank you. Now let's do some things that feel like you're not postponing them. So is it like clip a couple hostas? Is it make a phone call to make an appointment for something that you've been foregoing? What is one thing that you could do on behalf of yourself right now, today? In fact, not today, right now. What is the one thing that you can do for yourself? Don't wait for later today or any other time today. What could you do right now to tell yourself that you matter? Of course, being here has been helpful. Listening to this and getting engaged is helpful. And now you can make an action step that is uniquely yours. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. Really enjoyed nice to be with you all. Okay, bye.